I'm excited to share with you today again. From this time, it's going to be once again rebooting Revelation. Let's unveil the book of Revelation again for us today. Today, we're going to be entering part 19. But by the time we're done, there'll been 20 parts to this, 20 classes. Do you believe that? That's something. We're rebooting Revelation, a study of the book of Revelation from a Christ-centered view. Part 19, we're going to do chapters 20 and 21 today. Change the name from, because I originally was just going to do chapter 20, but chapter 20 kind of left you hanging. And then I kind of felt like incorporating 21. Then I think a week and a half from now, on the 15th of December, we will do in the evening the final chapter, which is chapter 22. And I wanted to spend time on that chapter, kind of taking our time as we're trying to bring this to a momentary close, I guess, because as I've been saying from the book of Revelations, it's cyclical, it is consistent and eternal. So it really, you can't bring this message to a close without starting over again, if that makes sense. Part 19, chapters 20 and 21, a new heaven and a new earth. Let's have a word of prayer. Father, we want to thank you that you are the creator, the source, the sustainer of all things. Because you breathed, we exist. God, I want to thank you in the same manner that breath is also known as the Ruach HaKodesh, Holy Spirit, as we translate it. And that Spirit breathes among us. We breathe Spirit in, we breathe Spirit out. And when I say that, we're not getting rid of it, we're sharing it. So Lord, I want to thank you for sharing with us your mind, your thoughts today. Thank you, God, for that. Thank you, Lord, we have the ability to perceive in the upper world. Thank you, Lord God, that our hearts are opened to you. God, I thank you that you would continue to flow through me as I share, but it's not just so much about what I say as much as what's illuminated within each of us as the Spirit opens it to us. In Jesus' name, amen. I just want to remind everybody, especially those of you watching, especially if this is like your first entrance into this, 19 parts later, all these sessions are on YouTube, on the Master Giovanni Ministries website, as well as the Oasis website. You can go into our media section and find all these there. They will be there for a season of time, and then they'll be moved over to another platform. Also, for those of you who are maybe just tuning in for the first time, the particular translation we're using is called the Mirror translation, although we definitely are involving other translations, as you will see. We're using that as kind of a basis because all the wonderful work that Mirror Publications, Francois Detroit has done, puts a lot of footnotes about Greek and Hebrew in there, particularly Greek, though there are some Hebrew references, which of course always gets me going. And in chapters 20 and 21, there's a lot. Now, what I do is I avoid all his footnotes, except maybe there's just a few you just can't help. All his footnotes so you can enjoy those and then put what we're saying together with them. And I believe God can give us that wonderful, multifaceted aspects of his wisdom. If you don't have a copy of the Mirror Bible, you can get it on Amazon or give us contact us in some way. We'll try to get you a copy. With that, let's review chapter 19, which was our last session, and it opened with declaring that the 144,000s, plural, the multitude, it's just an incredible multitude. And if you remember the number 144, one of its key meanings is redemption from the Hebrew language. It's the redeemed singing with one united voice, offering praise and gratitude. And within their statement, there were three key words that they said: judgments, righteousness, and truth. And we went through those in detail. Judgments, from Revelation 14:7, we are told to rejoice that the hour of krisis, and that's the Greek word for judgment. There's several of them. But in this particular one, it was krisis, crisis. So we get the word crisis from. Sometimes, we're in a crisis in life, and you might say it's a judgment time. It's a time to evaluate. So we're told to rejoice at that point, they're singing, at the hour of crisis, because it has come. And we discovered that the best time for a crisis is when your outcome is a sure win, which is the whole point. Many times we have crisis in our lives, and rather than rebuking it and coming against the devil right away, maybe we need to take a step back and say, okay, Father, what do I need to do with this? Right. Just to remind you, last week, and I would recommend you check out the message called Engaging Fear. That's what we did. And we talked about one of the keys was when Jesus was in the wilderness, being tempted for 40 days. We see at least 3 of the temptations, and he winds up quoting some scripture, etc. But the key thing was what was his temptation about? What was he afraid of? What was the crisis? The crisis was, am I really the Son of God or not? Because that's what the devil came to say. If you're the Son of God, do this. Now, if you think about all the internal talk there, it's like looking at that rock and going, well, I guess if I am the Son of God, I could turn this into bread. And the second he would have done that, something to the contrary would have happened. He realized he didn't have to prove to himself anything. And for that matter, he didn't have to prove it to anybody else. What's interesting about that then is because he didn't, and he walked away from that, later he could say, I'm the bread of life. Mm-hmm. Later he could say, I am the rock that the builders rejected. Okay? So that's the other thing too. We'll talk about this in a little bit, but many times in the time of crisis, we think it's got to be either or. Rock or bread. And many times we can transcend that into a whole nother place where even both can be valid. That's our time of crisis. The thing is because of Christ, because of God, the outcome is a sure win, which then moves us into the word righteousness. And we talked about, again, this word righteousness and how for many in the Western world, righteousness means doing right things or being right. Where in Hebraic thinking, and matter of fact, the word there, which is diakai, that word really means to walk the path. Which means you can make mistakes. As long as you're on the path, it's all good. Doesn't matter. The righteousness of the new covenant, which is the original covenant with Abraham, is based on the desire for relationship, identity, and trust. Romans 1:17 says, the dynamic of the gospel is the revelation of God's faith as the only valid basis for our belief. Because God believes in you, because God believes in you, because God believes in you, you have a basis to believe. It's not so much about believing the right things. It's about trusting. Somebody said the word earlier about trust. It's about trusting what he believes about you. Which then creates this other word, truth, aletheia. Aletheia really literally means not concealed anymore. Removing of the veil and uncovering that which was concealed through the egoistic fall. Philippians 3:12 through 15 says, I admit that I haven't yet acquired the absolute fullness that I'm pursuing. I don't depend on my own strength to accomplish this. I forget all of the past as I fasten my heart to the future instead. The unveiling. Sometimes we need to let go of some things in order to move forward. After discussing these ideas, I want to introduce a thought today. I didn't mention it last week, but, in retrospect, it may be a good idea. One of the key things for discovering divine truth, where the realities of God are no longer concealed, and that's about anything, is that each day we need to wake up with the notion that what I knew as truth yesterday may no longer be applicable today. Of course, it can grow and broaden. So I can't keep that view. I maybe have to let it grow and broaden. It also can transform into something different. And in some cases, it needs to be discarded because though I believed it to be true, it may not have been. and I need to humbly adjust. The thing is, do we walk in such a place of inner humility that we can position ourselves for any of those three possibilities, especially the third option, if we're going to continue to unveil the reality of Christ within us? Something to think about. We then went on and looked at the wonderful wedding feast, which was an eye-opener. We found that the wedding feast was anything but a pretty table set with lovely plates and a scrumptious Christmas-type meal. Was it? Rather, the harlot church, whose foundation is a misuse of biblically based religious and political alliances, who redefined Christ in the context of God will be gracious to you if you believe the right things and work hard at being a good Christian citizen. This false Christ and false church, however, is having its day of reckoning. And that's part of this wedding feast issue. A great thunderous applause from an innumerable mass of people is heard, evidently getting rid of this legalistic political church is something to celebrate. The exodus of the Tree of Life people from the harlot church is called the Bride of Christ. So when this comes into being, this so-called wedding feast, for example, we have this verse. Revelation 19:17 through 18. He invited all the birds of the sky to flock together for the great supper of God. Come feast on the flesh of all mankind. So let's put it this way. We're not feasting on turkeys. The turkeys are feasting on us. Of course, what does that really mean? This is all theater. This is not about killing them in the form of some terrible Alfred Hitchcock movie, okay? Rather, it's the victory of the little lamb who is now King of Kings and Lord of Lords. The serpentine ego, the base nature, the flesh. In all walks of life, and he gives a list. Slave and free, nobody's left out of that picture. It's consumed by the gospel of his grace, which is that which soars in the heavens. This victory and unveiling has been the focus from the very beginning. That's really the key of the book of Revelation. That's, again, one of the challenges is if we become literalists and don't understand poetry. Many times we fall into the trap, in certain cases, maybe even feed our egos. As we said, I think last time, it's interesting on how when we're angry, God must be angry at that too. Maybe not. The beast and the false prophet, since the false church has fallen, are exposed, and they decide to make war against the one who is faithful and true. And what happens? There is no war. The beast and the false prophet are simply arrested and cast into prison in the lake of fiery sulfur, brimstone. We talked about what that was. I don't want to get into that now. It'll take too long. But you may want to go back and listen to what that is there, the fiery sulfur, brimstone. The final verse of the chapter says that the beast and false prophets remnant were slain, but not by a weapon that shed anyone's physical blood, but the word of his mouth. The gospel of grace will over time prevail over any beast system or religious prophet's remnant. It will destroy, or better said, transform the egoistic base nature into a genuine desire to receive from God and reflect his image and likeness. On that note, Sir Miles, will you come and read chapters 20 and 21? That sounds scary. It's a lot of reading, right? Fortunately, chapter 21, like each verse is like a sentence for a bit, so you kind of get off easy.
Chapter 20. And I witnessed a celestial messenger descending out of the heavenly sphere, and he had the key of the bottomless abyss and a great chain over his hand. And he overpowered the dragon in its every disguise as the old serpent in the garden of Genesis, also called the devil, or going under the name Satan, and chained him up 1,000 years. Then he hurled him into the bottomless abyss, shut him up, and set a seal upon him, and thus made it impossible for him to continue to deceive the nations for the complete duration of the symbolic 1,000 years. He would then be let loose on the earth for a very brief moment. And I saw thrones, and those seated upon thrones had been given judgment. They are the souls who didn't worship the beast or its image, and did not take his mark in their foreheads or on their hands. The system of the beast discarded them because of the testimony of Jesus and because of the word of God, since they didn't fit into their religious mold. They are the living beings, joined together in the Christ life, reigning from their joint seatedness in the throne of the Lamb for 1,000 years. This is the first resurrection. Oh, the blessedness of this bliss, celebrated in the redeemed innocence of every single individual, discovering their inclusion in the first resurrection as their own, realizing that the second death has no bearing on them whatsoever. They will continue in their priesthood, and unto God and Christ they will co-reign with him for 1,000 years. And his obvious strategy would be to deceive the nations on a global scale, including the four corners of the earth, by assembling Gog and Magog in war. Their number is as the sand of the sea. They will spread across the earth and attempt to neutralize the queen bee bride of the Lamb by surrounding and besieging God's saints in the beloved city. Then fire will pour out of heaven and consume them. The devil who led them astray will be hurled into the lake of fire and brimstone, where his puppet partners, the beast and the false prophet, have already been confined to. Day and night they will be the subject of God's touchstone. For the ages of the ages, the very atmosphere of the entire universe will be thoroughly fumigated from any evidence of Satanas. And I saw a huge white throne, and it was as if heaven and earth fled away from the presence of the one seated upon the throne, and its place was never found again. And I saw everyone who ever died, small and great, standing before God. And the books were opened, and another book was opened, the book of life. The first volume of the books represented mankind's judgment based on their own works, versus the book of life, which celebrates the triumph of the Lamb. Every domain where the dead was held yielded them up to be judged according to his work, the work of Jesus. Everyone was there. The seed yielded up its dead. Also death and Hades yielded up their dead. Then death and Hades were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. And everything that was not written in the book of life was poured into the lake of fire. Chapter 21. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the age of the previous heaven and earth had passed away. Also, the sea was no longer present. And I saw her in spotless magnificence, the holy city, the new Jerusalem, descending out of the heavens, having been fully prepared as a bride and beautifully adorned for her husband. And a glorious announcement was heralded out of the throne. Behold, God's tabernacle is with humanity. He has taken up permanent residence in human skin to be with them in the closest possible association of oneness. They are his own possession, his tribe, and he is their God, inseparably entwined with them. He wipes every tear from their eyes and blots out every hurtful memory. And death shall be no more, nor any association with it, nor mourning and bitter weeping, nor any reference to pain, for the former things have passed away. And the one seated upon the throne said, Behold, I make all things new. And he instructed me to write, because these words are true and to be relied on. And he said to me, Everything is now fully accomplished. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the sum of the total entire prophetic conversation concerning mankind's redemption. I am both the origin and the conclusion of all things. Anyone thirsty can come and drink freely from the gift of the waters of life direct from its source. The conquering one inherits all things, and I will be God to him, and he will be my son. The fear-driven and unbelieving, those having become rotten to the core, sex peddlers and sorcerers, idolaters and deceivers, their measure is the lake burning with brimstone. This is the second death. And one of the 7 celestial messengers, having 7 seals, being filled with the 7 last wounds, came to me and spoke with me, saying, Come, I will show you the bride, the Lamb's wife. He carried me away in spirit unto a great and high mountain, and pointed out to me the holy city, Jerusalem, descending out of the heaven from God, possessing the glory of God. Her radiance resembled a precious and flawless jasper stone, transparent like crystal. She had an impressive high wall with 12 gates, and the names of the 12 tribes of the sons of Israel inscribed in them. From the east, 3 gates. From the north, 3 gates. From the south, 3 gates. And from the west, 3 gates. And the wall of the city had 12 foundations or thresholds to the gates, and in them the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. And the one speaking with me had a golden reed wherewith to measure the city, its gates, and its wall. And the city was structured in a perfect quadrangular cube, and he measured the city with that reed at 12,000 stadia. Its length and width and height are equal. And he also measured its wall, 144 cubits. His measure was the stature of a man, which is the measure of the celestial messenger. And the structure of its wall was jasper. And the city was pure gold, like pure glass. And the thresholds of every gate in the wall of the city was beautifully adorned with every precious stone. The first threshold, jasper; the second, sapphire; the third, chalcedony; the fourth, emerald; the fifth, sardonyx; the sixth, sardius; the seventh, chrysolite; the eighth, beryl; the ninth, topaz; the 10th, chrysoprase; the 11th, hyacinth; the 12th, amethyst. And each one of the 12 gates were an individual giant pearl, and the street of the city was pure gold, like transparent glass. And I saw no temple in it, for the Lord God, the supreme power, vested in the Lamb, is its temple. And the city had no need of the sun, nor of the moon, that they might shine in it, for the glory of God illuminated it. The Lamb is its lamp. And the nations will conduct their lives in the Lamb's light, and the kings of the earth bring their glory into her. And your gates will be open continually, day or night. They'll never be shut. And they will bring the glory and the honor of the nations into her. The nations will discover their redeemed, authentic doxa identity and priceless value in the light of the Lamb. And no one classified as common will enter into her, nor anyone making an abomination or a lie, but the only ones whose lives are defined in the Lamb's book of life. That which were common, abominable, and the fruit of deception were all dealt with in the Lamb's doing. Now, the Lamb's book of life defines us, and never again our own doing.
Once again, we have a reference to Christ at the beginning of this chapter as the one who has the keys to the abyss. When we started our lesson 10, which was chapter 9, we spoke of the idea of a star descending in direct reference to Christ. In contrast to the chapter 8, where we saw the fall of Lucifer also as a star, which were different Greek words describing different things at the time, a different descent, if you will. This time, the Greek phrase that's used is the same phrase and structure as when the Holy Spirit descended as a dove on Christ. As a matter of fact, in each of the Gospels, not just one of the Gospels, in all the Gospels that's mentioned, that same phrase is used. In addition, that same phraseology is used by the Apostle Paul in Ephesians. Let's have a look at that. What does he ascended mean except that he also descended into the lower earthly regions? He who descended is the one who ascended higher than all the heavens in order to fill the whole earth. So we're talking about a coming of Christ, if you will. And we know already, according to all the apostolic writings, Christ already defeated the dragon and his various religious political systems. Here we see the effect of that victory in timeless description. The dragon is chained and hurled into the abyss. Now, for those who remember Genesis factor, this place has another description called a desire to receive in chaos. Now, as a note here too, as we're looking at this notion of the dragon being chained here, remember we're thinking timelessness, we're looking at poetry, etc. This is not something that's going to happen in the future, and then exactly 1,000 years later to the day, he's going to be released out again. I mean, I've always thought, because when I first started reading the book of Revelation and listening to some teachings about that, it always puzzled me. It's like, okay, we chained up the idiot. Who's the nut that's going to let him out? Was the victory permanent or not? Well, it is. And we'll get to some of that in just a minute. So, like when the Spirit said, light be, here we see another aspect, okay? In Genesis 1:2, the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the tehom in Hebrew, the abyss. So that abyss has been around a long time. It's not a place somewhere out there. It's a spiritual state of being. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And of course, we hear the word light be, and it was. Right? Just light be, and it was. He didn't say, I rebuke you, darkness, in the name of me. He just, and maybe we need to rethink some of the things on how we deal with things. I think if there's ever a lesson in basics, we call it spiritual warfare a lot. You know, it's interesting that we use that term. But we're coming against so much. How about just speaking the light where we need to speak light? How about speaking love where we need to speak love? How about speaking peace when peace is necessary? Amen? Maybe even be peace. Be love. Be light. Like when the Spirit said light be, here we see another aspect. Direct references to the dragon's names or forms from the Garden of Eden to the present. There are three specific forms we see that the New Testament particularly references. These are those three forms. Serpent, devil, Satan. So let's look at the serpent first, because that was the original in the garden. That's what the dragon is called that. If you remember, we just read the dragon, the old serpent, right, from the garden. The egoistic root of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It projects that we are not like God enough, and that by partaking of its fruit, knowing good and evil, we will become like God. That's the real crux of it. It's an identity issue again. No different like when I said earlier about Jesus looking at that stone. Well, if I'm really the Son of God, I can do this. It's an identity issue, okay? And we have the right to choose and explore these different aspects of identity. If we didn't, we wouldn't be like God, because God is rooted in his character. It's called love, and love isn't love unless you have the ability to choose to do it. If not, you're a robot. Or to put it in more modern terms, an android. So we're told in theatric imagery that he's bound for 1,000 years. Who's bound? It says, well, with serpent, but all this gets bound. Okay, all this is. So from the serpent, which is projecting we're not like God enough, and by partaking of its fruit we'll become like God, something happens. Won't get into it. This is probably a whole lesson in and of itself. We need to realize something. When we partook of the tree, the serpent changed its form too. Whatever it was before, won't get into that so much right now, it then, when we partook, went on its belly to the ground. Its form changed as well. The form that it changed into is what we call devil. Oversimplification right now, but just track with me. Devil. Its simplest definition comes from two Greek words combined. Dia, meaning through, and bolos, meaning fall. Hence the result of the fall. This is the serpent's altered form. It's through the fall. Anything that came through the fall, if you want to use those terms, is devil. It's not the guy over there sitting on the corner of the row. Of course, I just pointed to Miles, but I've seen it. That's why he needs to memorize all the gold and the different stones and all that stuff. No, it's the devil's doing that. Technically, you're in the devil now. And actually, it's not so much God trying to cast the devil out of us as much as he's trying to get us out of the devil. Does that make sense? Okay. And then finally, as a product of the diabolos through the fall comes the Satan, which is a Hebrew word, which simply means adversary, which really means anything contrary to the nature and intent of the Creator. This is going to be bound 1,000 years. 1,000 years, the number really speaks of fullness. Understand, 1,000 is it's not a period of time in that respect because of what 1,000 means. For that matter, the word 1,000 in Hebrew is aleph, which means to tame something, usually by learning. For example, I know I've shared this here before. I won't do it a lot right now, but consider Mark chapter 5. We have the quote, the demoniac of the Gadarenes. Okay. He could not be tamed. Well, when he's dialoguing with Jesus, we find out, he says, well, there's 2,000 of us. Why? And 1,000. Because in Hebraic thinking, yes, we're in the Decapolis and there's 600 garrisons at 6,000. But 2 and 1,000 means complete taming. Okay, so Jesus was taming what couldn't be tamed there. So, the point is, when we're looking at this is the taming of this system as it progresses from the knowledge of good and evil through the fall to becoming adverse to God. The defeat and shackling of the serpent took place at the time of the cross and resurrection. Let's understand from a victorious Christ now point of view here. The first is, going backwards now for a minute, the Satan, which occurred through the fall, which were the establishment of blood sacrifices and rules to appease an angry god, gods, or goddesses, were annulled in both the message of Christ and his forgiveness of our violence to him on the cross, and most importantly, at the resurrection. At that point, this adversity stops. Next up, then, is this fellow, the diabolos. All the effect of the fall has been undone. The resurrection is the undoing of that fall. I've said it time and time again, but I think it's important. While the cross has a powerful meaning on so many levels, we have to realize whatever put him there has been undone at the resurrection. And we need to constantly approach it from that standpoint. Because, ultimately, the last is that belief that we're not like God enough, that top one, that was nailed, that belief system was nailed to the cross as well. By removing rules and sacrifices on good and evil, right and wrong, yet for a short space of time, these mindsets still exist. This is that time. Because here we are, right? If you want to use an old cliche phrase, the devil is a defeated foe. But yet, he walks around like a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. How does that happen? He's been chained, he's been bound, but he's out for a period of time. You're looking at him. Or, from a Christ point of view, you're looking at him. Eventually, this will conclude as well, which brings us to this point in the discussion. There's an infinite number of thrones that's heralding the celebration of God. Now, to jump ahead for a moment, when you go back and look at these verses, you'll notice there were certain things that were in them, like the whole notion of the city of Jerusalem. We're not talking about a physical city that's going to come like a spaceship and descend here on planet Earth and all that stuff. Okay? These numbers, the colors, all that, which I'm not going to go into a lot here, but I will talk about the overall view. But consider the number 12 is used several times. What's the number 12? 12 is about governments. Okay? 144 was used several times. That's about redemption. The number 3, as in Trinity, was used several times. That make up the 12. Why? Well, the perichoresis. The whole notion of Trinitarian theology is not about trying to figure out the mathematical equation, as one guy said. It's not about a math equation. There's 3, there's 1, 1 times 1 times 1. How does it all work out? It's not a mathematical equation. It is a description of a harmony. Perichoresis, Greek word that was used in the first century, is the divine dance. It's the spinning, where not one is greater than the other in that triune scenario. And it's not these 3 are separate from you, but actually you are part of this dance because you're that image and likeness. So this is all about preferring the other, not reigning over others. Make sense? So Jesus displays that beautifully. He's King of Kings, Lord of Lords. And what does he do? Gets on his knees and washes feet. So there's an infinite number of thrones of these redeemed people, this mindset, the folks that have come to the realization not only that the image and likeness of God, but that they are defined then by perichoresis, by his government rule, which is serving others, and that number 144, redemption idea of being totally and completely removed from the devil system, we'll call it that, the serpent system, the dragon system, the beast system, all those words. Now, those infinite number of thrones that are praising God at this time are those who did not live by the mark, the mindset and deeds of the beast, serpent, devil, adversary, etc., false prophet. But the beast political religious system discarded such people because they did not fit into the dragon's mold. And I believe in the text it said dragon's religious mold. However, these saints reign joined to the mind of Christ, living from a place of peace and authority. Last week when we talked about engaging fear, how many times have we done things like, I'm going to take authority? By just doing that, you're admitting you don't have it. Wow. Yeah. Jesus' authority, if you go back to the temptations, was never rooted in power. The product was that, but it was never rooted in power. It was in peace. Wow. The peace of the tranquility of, I don't have to prove I know I'm the Son of God. As I said, he became the bread of life, without ever having to turn a stone to prove it. And for that matter, he was also the stone that the builders rejected, because he didn't have to manipulate that stone either. It's interesting, just to point out again, when Jesus spoke, quote, the scriptures, he wasn't talking to the devil about them if you really go back. He's talking to himself. He's discovering himself in those. That's where his identity lies. That's why by the time you get to John 5, he says to the Pharisees, you search the scriptures and you think you found life, but they are they that testify of me. He saw the scripture as a voice to him. So when he said, man does not live by bread alone, but every breath that proceeds out of the mouth of God, he was talking about himself. The idea then, however, these saints reign joined to that mind of Christ we're talking about right now, living from a place of peace and authority. The authority comes from peace. You can't shake a person who lives in peace. There's an authority about their own life they have when they have peace that nobody can shake. And out of that, many times, is how you move the mountains. Because it's rooted in the peace of identity that when you speak and come from that place, you don't have to scream, you don't have to shout, or like Jesus, we talked about that, just walks through the crowd, not rebuking anybody, not telling anybody, get out of my way. He just walks through the crowd because of that sense of identity that gives authority. That is called the first resurrection. That mindset is the first resurrection. Colossians 3:2-3 tells us, this is the Weiss translation, is a Greek scholar. He translates it this way: the things above be constantly setting your mind upon, not the things of the earth. For you died, past tense, and your life has been hidden in Christ, in God. In Christ, in God. Whenever the Christ is made visible, our life, then also you with him shall be manifested in glory. He's our life. This is the first resurrection right there. It's not about bodies getting out of graves. It's about that mindset. If you allow yourself to see you as God sees you, and see yourself as God sees himself, all of a sudden, I've already attained this first resurrection. I've come out of death. Remember, death is not a body dead as much as it is that thinking of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That's when God said, when you eat of that, you're dead. That's death. It's the absence of life. This is what life looks like. But what winds up happening, we find a resurgence, the final last statement about that system. Harlot's gone, beast is gone, false prophet's gone, all that's handled. We're now dealing with the dragon system, the root of this, the serpent of old, the devil, the Satan. We're dealing the root of all this now. And we find this. Gog and Magog is particularly mentioned at that point. Now, I know back in my day when I was studying all this, I was told it was, Russia coming down into the Middle East and all this sort of stuff, because that was Gog and Magog. But more importantly, if we're consistent, what do these words mean? Well, Gog is a roof or covering. And he is, according to the Bible, he is known as the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal. What do they mean? First of all, he's known as the prince of the mind, the head, the Rosh. That mindset. Second, Meshech means to draw forth. It's, if you think of the word Moses, okay? Moshe, that means to draw out of the water. Meshech is the drawing forth of a sound. Okay? And Tuval means to produce. So it's the idea that the roof, the covering, if you will, is the mindset that brings forth a sound that produces. What is that sound? What is that? It's that system. The purpose of the mindset resurgence is once again to deceive the nations, it says. However, it never grows to the point of the false church or a harlot as before. Though they will try to surround the first resurrection, the mindset. That's what they're surrounding. It's an interesting, there is a textual thing that I didn't want to get into it too much, but there is a slight difference of the Greek words used in the Textus Receptus, King James, and the NA27 version about what it means to surround. But just consider it this way. If you can think about it, have you ever had a thought swarm through your mind, kind of spin your mind around? You were doing fine, and all of a sudden this thought hits you, seemingly coming out of nowhere. It's that idea, okay? Though they will try to surround those of the first resurrection, the mind of Christ, and persuade them to return to the penal substitution, vicarious atonement thinking of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they're unsuccessful. Why? What happens? Fire comes from heaven. Now, from the beginning of the book of Revelation, we want to stay consistent. Notice Christ had eyes of fire. Remember, we talked about this. His feet were brass purified by fire. And the churches were fiery lampstands. Fire is purification. And it even says so. Revelation said his feet were like brass purified by fire. Okay, and we see that repeated several times. Fire in both Jewish thinking and the book of Revelation is for purification. The fire came and purified their thinking. Didn't burn them to a crisp. And everybody go, yay, we got those guys. In the end, the ecclesia is preserved, and those who are attempting to reinvent the harlot church find themselves consumed and purified. The result is that the devil, the diabolos, the false system, is thrown into the lake of fire, his place of origin, to be tested and purified as well. Now, remember the word touchstone was used. We translate it, especially older translations, tormented. Really, no, it's a touchstone. What a touchstone does is define, it's what you use to talk about the purity of gold. And as then gold goes through its purification process, you use the touchstone to see how far along it's come. That's the word that's used there. Not tormented as in writhing on the floor in absolute pain forever and ever and ever. That's a whole nother discussion. We'll get to that in a little bit because we can't help to avoid that. Because the next thing that appears after the mindset is finally taken care of is this great white throne. And great theatrical expression, a white throne appears, and heaven and earth flee. You thought heaven was forever. Again, we mentioned that, I think the last class made the suggestion of, it's interesting how up until all this point, heaven is a place where God lives, until now, couldn't have meant that. Right. So let's break our consistent context here. Why? First of all, according to Thayer's lexicon, that idea of heaven and earth fleeing, the word flee literally means to vanish. Why? He says, of course, it's a poetical statement. Of course, that's what we've been dealing with. We are now returning really to the source at this point. And by returning to the source, a rebirth is reoccurring with the next phase of advancement of creation about to occur, because there will be a new heaven and a new earth. But just like, if you remember we talked about this, just like with the reboot of earth, as we call it, with Noah, what existed before, yes, it still kind of came along into the new one, but there was a new thing that occurred. That was the revelation of grace in the eyes of Yahweh. That didn't exist. Noah was the one who drew that out. And a new heaven and new earth could be created with that now in the equation. Well, same thing is happening here. Because what happens then is this. A whole bunch of books are opened. Now, where does this come from? All these books are open. You know, again, I've even taught this way back in the day. There's, all the books here of all the unsaved people. And then there's the book here of all of the saved people. If your name's not here, we're now going to go over your good rights and wrongs, good and evil, which really is kind of ridiculous because you're sentenced to the other place anyway. Because what we stepped back from, which is fine, on the work system, it's all about, are you weighing in or out the good and evil? If you got more good, less than evil. The problem is, what we've then advanced that into is another form of work system, which basically said, it doesn't matter what those works are. If you don't have Jesus, hear me out, if you don't have Jesus, you're done with. It's like close, but no cigar. Almost. It's like, but what we then did is make the receiving of Jesus and living that life another work. Where do we get this from? This whole thing about the books being open, etc. This is a direct reference to Jewish religious thinking and theology, and specifically comes out of the Old Testament. And you see it here, for example, in Deuteronomy 29:20, one of several places. The Lord shall never be willing to forgive him. What has happened, they've returned to they went from a grant covenant, I've mentioned this to you before, to a Suzerain vassal covenant, where God, technically, if he wanted to forgive you on a vassal covenant, he can't forgive you. You got to pay the debt. course, thank God, God breaks through that and says, forget all that system. I'm going to destroy that. I will have nothing to do with that. But this is how in Deuteronomy, when you start reading Deuteronomy, it's all about blessing and curse and all this sort of stuff. That's all that system. It's a revelation of, if you will, the serpent at his best. The Lord shall never be willing to forgive him, but rather the anger of the Lord. Who do we say the anger of the Lord was? Satan, exactly. Okay, he's the adverse one. But rather the adverse one. And his jealousy will burn against that man, and every curse which is written in this book will rest on him, and the Lord will blot out his name from under heaven. I'm so glad we're not part of that. And God's saying, I'm glad I'm not part of that. This was the Caesarean vassal covenant renewed in Moab. And it gets renewed over and over again several times because of the way that covenant works. It's always a mess. But on the positive side, there's this book. The old books, for that matter, there are probably other religious systems as well, of all kinds. They have judgments, curses, condemnations, all built out of the tree of knowledge and good and evil system. The verses tell us that everyone was there in Revelation, everyone was there from the world of death, remember what that means now, and the world of Hades. What is Hades? Those who haven't seen yet. That word is used in Matthew 16:18 when Jesus says, we have translated in King James, and the gates of hell will not prevail against them, which really doesn't make sense. Have you ever seen a gate get up and hit somebody? No. It's the idea that the word Hades means unseen. That's the meaning. In other words, even those who haven't seen will see. The gates, the eye gates, if you will, the inner gates of my closed eye system are going to be opened. So what does he do? Well, that other book was opened, the Lamb's Book of Life, and anything that was not written in the book of life was thrown into the fire. The Greek phrase there is etis. It's really not about just anyone thrown into the fire, it's anything. So if I have to be consistent with the rest of this book, as well as other scriptures, God's not discarding his own image and likeness into the flames. But what he is putting into the flames, mind you what their intention is, we just mentioned it earlier, is to get rid of that tree of knowledge of good and evil system. Purify it. The Apostle Paul uses the exact same vocabulary, literally the same words in Greek when he says this. Now, if anyone, that's the phrase, if anyone builds on this foundation of gold, silver, and precious stones, wood, hay, straw, each one's work, this is what it's all about. This is about works, right? We're dealing with the works issue here. Each one's work will become clear, for the day will declare it, because it will be revealed by fire. And the fire will test, there's the touchstone, each one's work, what sort it is. If anyone's work which he has built on it endures, he will receive a reward. If anyone's work is burned, he will suffer loss, but he himself will be saved, yet as though through fire. So the text is not speaking of people thrown into eternal conscious torment forever, nor being annihilated as if they never existed. Rather, we had the beast, the false prophet, the harlot system. These are all systems of thinking, and most importantly, the serpent root system thrown into the fire. Now we have all the mindset of works and moralism thrown into the fire as well. If it doesn't match the Lamb's book, which is from the tree of life-based system, it is no longer usable and must be purified. And in many cases, when we're in the crisis now, it's about, am I gonna look at this as good and evil? Really? See, the thing is, I even find when I talk to folks, sometimes it says, well, are you saying that that's good? Or are you saying that's evil? I say, no. Get your mind out of that way of thinking. Try to come to another space where I'm trying to come from. Unfortunately, because that many times is our frame of reference, we compartmentalize everything. Is it a rock or bread? Right. Jesus' response is, both. It's good. The serpent system will always ask you to pick a side. Heaven, the desire to give and bless as we knew it, and the earth, the desire to receive as we knew it, is reborn anew and afresh. A new Jerusalem, not racked with laws, sacrificial priesthoods, and blood sacrifices, descends to that desire to receive now, finally. Earth. Rather, this is the Lamb's bride, one full of grace and blessing. The Jerusalem that's from above. Listen to the words of the Apostle Paul. Now Hagar is Mount Sinai. This is Galatians 4:25 through 26. Now Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia. She corresponds to the present Jerusalem, for she is in slavery with her children. Now he's not talking about Jewish people. He's talking about anybody of that system that's wrapped up in the serpent, devil, Satan system of thinking. I'm not like God enough. I got to do something good to prove it. I got to come against evil to prove it. Just pick up the stone, go play catch. But the Jerusalem above is free, and she's our mother. She's ours. That way of thinking is our source. The tabernacle of God is among humanity, it says. The fullness of God is with mankind. No more tears, hurtful memories, death, bitter weeping, or pain. Why? Because the former world system that humanity was enslaved to has passed away. Now everything is fully accomplished in this aspect of creation. He is the first Adam and the last Adam. He is the Alpha and the Omega. If you think about it, he always, now and forever, said anyone can drink from his waters of life. It wasn't now that sometime in the future when all these prophecies come to pass, idea that now we can all drink. Jesus stood then, if you remember, back then at in the temple and said, come and drink. It has never changed. But here again, the book of Revelation is giving us a theatrical view of it unfolding. Yet there will always be permission to choose to drink and participate in the garden, if you will, the New Jerusalem, or not. The choice doesn't go away. The choice must always be there. And we see that. If that were not so, first of all, we would have no authentic relationship with God, no love, and no God-likeness. In the new heaven and new earth, there is a permanency of presence now. Now, all of a sudden, we're in Noah's, because we're technically living in Noah's time still in one respect. Okay, technically, although I do marker that another reboot happened at the cross and resurrection. Okay, that's carrying us even further. Noah discovered this grace thing, if you will, in the eyes of God that was able to then move into Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, okay, on into Joseph. And I use Joseph in the book of Melchizedek with a dual form because technically it stops there and then we get into the Mosaic law. But by no accident is Joseph the father of Christ, the stepfather of Christ. So that technically continues on. Okay, but the point is that mindset from grace, then we have the cross and resurrection, which is the annihilation of that serpent, devil, see if we can say it all right now. Serpent, devil, Satan, beast, dragon, false prophet, harlot church system. Okay. Seashells by the seashore. In the new heaven and new earth, there is a permanency of presence. Yet there are those who still may choose to be fear-driven and walk another way. We'll talk, that's really next lesson. It'll be quite interesting. They are welcome to return to the place outside of the city. But before we discuss about what that's about, I want to go back to the Lamb's wife, because ultimately, the bride, that's an interesting thing, because even the writer says, okay, there are these folks. But before we go there, let's talk more about the Lamb's bride. The bride, the New Jerusalem, is measured as a perfect cube, a block. In Hebraic thinking, we have talked about block logic and the interpretive dynamics of roots and branches from the beginning of these classes. Thus, there are many aspects to the tabernacle of God, one which is dynamic, multidimensional awareness. Remember, 3, 12, 144, those were all used, those numbers there, even a few others, but this is a lesson in and of itself. It's not chronological or linear, which is the form the serpent took after the fall. Serpent system is linear. God's system is cyclical or cubic. The fall did not happen just some 6,000 years ago, according to some, or sometime in the past. Rather, the fall changed time as we know it and experience it. On the other hand, in Revelation 21:17, it said that the New Jerusalem was the measure of mankind, or humanity. This is the completed revelation of Christ in God in mankind. Like this multicolored cubic description, it's a dynamic of diversity and yet a total unity. Now, if you remember, in the text it talked about God in human skin. Well, there's a reason for that. The word tabernacle in Greek is skine. Thus, the verses are specific. There is no temple in this New Jerusalem. Why? First, it kind of gets really interesting, all the things that are called temple by the text. First, the Lamb is the light and its temple. Think of what verse 17 through verse 23 was saying. Humanity is the temple in which the light and Lamb radiates. And then it says in verse 21 that God is its temple. With this expanding dynamic, I love Rabbi David Matt's description. I've used it for years after I first heard it, because it's just a soundbite that says it all. God is not a static being, but a dynamic becoming. With this expanding dynamic life, we find that there will be something called nations and kings who will share together in this presence. The gates of this reality and union of God and mankind will always be open regardless. No religion. Now, and it's interesting what it lists, but the bottom line is no religiosity, legalism, immoral or moral, sacrificial system like in the days of old will be allowed to enter its open gates. Why? Because those are closed systems. You're either in or you're out. In God's case, everyone's allowed in, and for that matter, you can also go out. And we'll find in the next chapter, which he mentioned here, there are those that are still on the outside. Who are they? How'd they get there in the new heaven and new earth? That'll be next week. Such systems, because they're closed, the system of life, because it's always dynamic, can't survive in them. So how do you try to end these 2 chapters? A lot of it was describing the New Jerusalem, this cube-like thing. I mean, when I first was reading the book of Revelation some 40 some odd years ago, and being very much a literalist, reading it like I would read a newspaper, I was always trying to figure out, why is it limited to these sizes? If a whole bunch of people, I mean, planet Earth right now is what, 7 billion or something like that? This is way smaller than planet Earth. It's like, well, do we all kind of cram in there? But the second you see these as images, the perfect eminence of life, if you will. I find it interesting, too, that the Tesseract or whatever it is in the Marvel is also a square, you know. It's like, really? Like you thought that on your own. So the next lesson is going to be the conclusion. And to be honest with you, I feel like I've skipped so much. But that's part of the fun. Hopefully, really, what we've gone through, which we will hopefully conclude in some way, the next lesson, which will be chapter 22, part 20, will be called the Tree of Life. Because ultimately, that's what it ends with. The Tree of Life, which is the ultimate expression of the purpose of the revelation of the Christ this whole time, with all these different dynamics, it's the Tree of Life alone. It doesn't say, and technically, it doesn't say, well, there's this other tree with it. But yet, guess what? Outside the perimeter of that way of thinking still lies the other. Sort of. But even then, something happens. Of course, that's the next chapter. I'm not going to do that now. Just teasing you, yes. Same bat time, same bat channel. Well, actually, no, it's going to be a different time. It'll be a Wednesday night at 7:05 Pacific Standard Time. But spiritually speaking, but there's no time and space. Same bat time, same bat channel. How's that? Okay. Well, I hope you enjoyed this today, because really, at this point, the writer is winding down all the stuff that we've done, and you could almost say that. And the chapter break is really not accurate. It'll be, I think, a verse or two after into the new chapter. It's almost as if we're entering the epilogue. After the drama is done with an explanation of all the very present tense things that are happening. So on that, Father, I thank you for this time together. I thank you for this incredible book. There's so much to it. And yet at the same time, God, it's simple. It's simple in the respect that God loves you. You're his creation. He made you just like him. And he's given us the right to discover what that is by choice. In Jesus' name, amen. Be blessed as you go.